நமஸ்காரம். விண்ணாடும் தேவர்க்கும் மேலாகிய வேதியனை மன்னாடும் மன்னவர்க்கும் மாண்பாகி நின்றானை தன்னார் தமிழளிக்கும் தன்பாண்டி நாட்டானை பெண்ணாடும் பாகனை பேணுப் பெருந்துறையில் கண்ணார் கடல் காட்டி நாயேனை ஆட்கொண்ட அண்ணாமலையானை பாடுதுங்கான் அம்மானாய். Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, and thanks for joining us today evening for this series that we are starting today to take you through a virtual journey to the 5 temples of South India, Shiva temples of South India to be more particular, that are associated with the 5 natural elements, or the Pancha Bhootha Kshetras, or the Pancha Bhootha Sthalams as they are called. This series starting today will continue for the next 5 weeks to come, and every Sunday evening between 6 to 7 or 7:30 max, we will take you through one temple from the list of Pancha Bhootha Kshetras. We all know that worshipping natural objects and natural elements is a common concept. It's an integral part of Hindu traditions, Indian culture. So we have the creation concept, which involves these Pancha Bhutas, and very clearly Taittiriya Upanishad verses that says Akashat Vayuhu Vayor Agnihi Agneerapaha Abhya Prithvi. So you have these 5 elements that kind of dissociate from one another or evolve out of one another, and when the end of the yuga happens and when the samharam has got to take place, in the same order they start getting into one another and dissolve into one another. Finally it all rests in the ether space, and the process kind of continues to freeze into the Almighty, and once again the creation starts, and that's how the cycle goes on. So these 5 elements are integral part of creation, and all living beings are made up of these 5 elements, are dependent on these 5 elements in different proportions. So it's been an intellectual way to list out these 5 elements and to consider them to be sacred and worshipping them. And as this tradition continued, a much later period, 5 sanctified shrines, which are directly associated with these 5 elements through traditional records or happenings according to the Sthala Puranas and others, have been identified by the scholars, and it's been a tradition to worship those places. So Shaivite tradition, yeah, that's the cycle. Akashat Vayuhu, from Vayu it's Agni, and from Agni it's water, and then that completes it with land. The cycle gets completed with land. So here in South Indian Shaivite tradition, these 5 elements are identified with 5 specific temples: Kanchi Ekambareshwarar temple, Thiruvanikka Jambukeshwara temple, Thiruvannamalai Arunachaleshwara's temple, and Kalahasti, Sri Kalahasti, Kalathiyapar temple, Kalastishwara temple, and finally Akasha Kshetram, which is Chidambaram Nadarajaswami temple. So these 5 temples have been identified, and the Moola Lingam enshrined in each Kshetram is called by the name of the element. So today we're going to look at Ekambareshwarar Kshetram, or the Kanchipuram Ekambareshwarar temple, which is identified as the Prithvi Kshetram, and hence the Moola Lingam is referred to as Prithvi Lingam. Similarly, you have the Apu Lingam, the Tejo Lingam, and Vayu Lingam, and the Akasha Lingam in Chidambaram. So this is a very, very interesting concept with which they have identified these Kshetrams, and each of the Moola Lingam is considered to be an embodiment or a personification of that particular element through recorded Sthala Puranas, and hence we show our respect to them and worship them. And worshipping natural elements like trees, animals, shrubs, herbs, ant hills, or other elements, like if you take water for example, in different forms it's identified with different devatas, starting from rain and lake water, tank water, how each of it is different, samudram, or the vast ocean. So all of these elements of nature support life form, and human beings are directly or indirectly benefited through these elements. So it's only natural to consider them to be sacred and worship them, bow before them, because going against nature is something that Indian tradition never suggests. So our lifestyle has always been running parallel to nature, and that's how we have been through ages. And when we overdo this or go against the flow, that's when we start facing troubles. So this is more like a very, very ancient system where thanking elements that supports life forms, that supports our life here on this earth, has been carried on in different forms, in different ways, in different cultures in India. So every state or every region will have its own way, but ultimately the aim will be to bow before nature, be thankful to it, and maintain it pollution free. So Ekambareshwarar temple, the shrine which is associated with Prithvi or earth as a Tattvam, one of the very, very prominent Shiva shrines, a very important shrine, in fact, and a trip to Tamil Nadu is certainly incomplete without visiting the Ekambareshwarar shrine. Kanchipuram, to begin with, is one of the two most ancient cities of Tamil Nadu, the other one being Madurai. Steeped in history, can be put at par with the Athens probably, because we need all these indices from the West to compare and make our own people understand, unfortunately. But yeah, that's how old, ancient, and culturally rich it has been. It can be rightly identified as the cultural capital of Tamil Nadu, or for that matter, the whole of South India, or to an extent, if you want to list out cities that are ancient and that have contributed to a very big level in shaping the culture of India, certainly Kanchipuram will be in the list. It's been an erstwhile educational capital also, because it's compared with that of Nalanda and Takshila of the north. And so people have traveled from far and wide here to Kanchipuram, stay here and get themselves educated, and turned out being this city takes the pride of churning out, in fact, several scholars of different schools of philosophy and different languages and more. So Kanchipuram has survived that way till date. And Kanchipuram, by and large, today is split into three parts. That's more like a historic evolution. You have the Vishnu Kanchi, which is like the easternmost end of the city, which is dominated by the Varadaraja Swami temple, where the deity is enshrined under what is called as the Punyakoti Vimanam. And then in the center of the city is Kamakshi Amman temple. She is, if you visualize Kanchipuram as a fully bloomed lotus flower, Kamakshi's shrine is right in the center, and she is housed under what is called as the Kamakoti Vimanam. And to balance it, on the northwestern side is Ekambareshwarar shrine, or Shiva Kanchi as it is geographically called, with the shrine of Shiva dominating the landscape. So all these three prominent gods, Mahavishnu, Shakti, and Parameshwara, or Paramatma, Parashakti, and Parameshwara, all three of these important deities of the Hindu pantheon are housed in three equally superimposing temple campuses, with the Vimanams being Punyakoti, Kamakoti, and Rudrakoti, the Vimanam under which Ekambareshwara is enshrined. Kanchipuram has been visited by several scholars from far and wide. You have travelers who've come here who've given us enough documentaries through their travelogues, which speaks about how culturally rich Kanchipuram was even 2 millennia back. And it's been a continuous tradition till date that you find some of the finest craftsmen, scholars of language and various other skills who are still residents of this ancient city of Kanchi. So all these three important deities and the place. And as early as the Tevaram times, Appar refers to Kanchi as Kalviyil Karaila Kanchima Nagaram, which is like it's unparalleled when it comes to the kind of education that you get. Kanchi is superlative. And more importantly, Kanchipuram was like the center for religious center and center for pilgrimage for various different schools, and that includes non-Vedic schools like Jains and Buddhists also. Through the pages of history, we can see how they've also been of considerable population in the city for several years, and Buddhist records at least till 8th and 9th century, till the end of the Pallava rule, they've been there, and after which both these populations have dwindled, and the Jains at least managed to go to the banks of Palar River in the southern part of Kanchipuram, and they are still there as a small community, the Tamil-speaking Jain population. But today's context, these three temples dominate as they've always been. And so of these three, it's Ekambareshwarar Kshetram, or Ekambareshwarar's Ekambara Kshetram, which is identified to be the residence of Prithvi Lingam, Shiva as personification of earth, that we're going to see today. The traditional accounts or the Sthala Puranas starts from Kailasha. Most of these Sthala Puranas help us understand the arrival of the Murti to that particular Kshetra, to that particular shrine. So it starts from Kailasha, where one fine day, Parvati very playfully closed the eyes of Shiva. We all know in Kailasha Parvatam, Parameshwara is always in a penance, and he continues that penance so that the universe sustains itself. It runs the way it is. And if there is going to be a disturbance in his penance, that will have an impact on the living beings here. So the moment his eyes were closed by Parvati, the eyes which are supposed to be representations of sun and the moon, that eyes which gives brilliance and radiance and shine and all that to sun and the moon, were blinded for a moment. She closed them playfully, which caused a kind of a chaotic scenario here in the universe, and the living beings they kind of they were terrorized for a moment, not knowing what was happening. And this forced Shiva to get annoyed and curses Parvati to be born as one among the physical beings here in this world, and engage in a penance to get her curse cleansed off so that she can come back to Kailasha as Uma Parvati, the consort of Shiva there. So she is advised to go to Varanasi Kshetram on the banks of Ganga, the most sacred of all sacred towns of the Bharatavarsha. So she goes there and she discusses with the rishis there in the banks of Ganga, and tells her all that has happened and requests them to suggest the kind of dharmic activities that she can engage in so that the curse on her is removed off. So the rishis suggest her all the 32 different dharmic activities that are suggested to earn you good, to earn punya to yourself. So Parvati starts doing all the 32 dharmakaryas, one of which is Annadhanam. So she becomes the Annapurani in Kasi, stays there eternally to bless people with not just the food for your hunger, but for your to quench your intellectual hunger too. So she provides you jnanam, which fulfills your intellectual hunger too. So that is the role of Annapurani in the Varanasi Kshetram. So she stays there. And then this continues for several years to come, and the rishis suggest that she goes on a pilgrimage to down south, cross the Vindhyas and go down south to the Dakshina Bharata, and suggest again that there is this city called Kanchipuram, Kamakoti, the city which is believed to be the most important of all the 7 places in India, which when visited brings you salvation. So you have these 7 shrines, the Saptamukti Kshetrams as they are called. So Kanchi is the only shrine in the south of India. So they say that this is like the most sacred Kshetra. Go there and worship Shiva, install a Shivalingam and worship him there. Maybe that will help you, that will help you get rid of this sin. So Parvati makes a journey. She comes down on a pilgrimage with all her associates from Kasi to Kanchipuram to stay there on the banks of the Vegavati river, installs a Shivalingam on the foot of a mango tree. She spots a mango tree there, and a very divine looking mango tree in fact, and she installs a Shivalingam out of, she makes a Shivalingam herself from the earth at the foot of the tree and installs the Murti there, invokes the Murti in the Shivalingam and worships it. This is how the Prithvi Lingam came to be installed there. Then of course the story continues that as she was performing daily rituals, one fine morning Shiva wanted to test her and command the Ganges in his hairlocks to flow through the Vegavati river, to flow through the tree, the tree under which Parvati was busy doing her puja, flow just touching the tree as a gushing flow, as a sudden gushing flow, and Ganga goes by the command and flows down very close, so fast that Parvati was, she was worried for a moment that the flow of the water would probably dissolve the Shivalingam, which is made out of earth, and she goes and hugs the Shivalingam in order to safeguard it. So, she is terrorized for a moment. In fact, she is, and she shouts out "Kampa Kampa," which means like, it's a sound that comes out when you are tremored. So she gives out that sound and commands Durga to stand there to guard the altar space without being dissolved. So all this happens, and in fact, Kali comes out. In fact, Kali is ordered to stay there to control the might of the flowing water, and so Kali comes out to the rescue of Parvati, and this form of Kali is identified as Pralaya Bandhini, the one who could control the pralayam that was happening, or in fact, managed to close the pralayam that was going to happen, because the water flow was quite sudden and fast. So all these shrines, that of Pralaya Bandhini and Ekambareshwarar Lingam and all that, is there inside the temple campus today. This is the Stalapuranam as to how the Prithvi Lingam got enshrined here. Of course, the story does not get over here. In fact, Parvati is suggested to leave Kanchi after all this happens, continue her pilgrimage to Tiruvannamalai, Arunachaleswara Kshetram, and engage in a penance there and wait till Shiva appears there to take her back to the Kailasha. So Kashi, followed by Kanchi, and then Tiruvannamalai. This is the pilgrimage that Parvati took. So Ekambareshwara Kshetram comes in between her pilgrimage, and the Prithvi Lingam that she enshrined is what is believed to be there, still there, which is being worshipped. We'll go through a virtual tour. Today's context, of course, Kanchipuram is fondly referred to as the town of 1,000 temples. So that's the number there. Probably it might be actually more. And you name a deity, you can find several temples dedicated to that particular god. So if you take Shiva temples, especially, that tops the list of temples for different gods. And you might be surprised to see Shiva temples in the backyards of random houses, a few small shrines there in the midst of an agricultural field, or temples that are in lanes that you would definitely not imagine that it can have a temple kinds. So walk in any street, any direction for like 20, 30 feet, you will see a temple there. That's how special the Kanchipura Kshetram is. If I'm right, I think probably after Kanchipuram, it's Kumbakonam, which can compete closely to the number of temples. And both these temple towns are special compared to all other temple towns of Tamil Nadu at an urban planning level, because mostly all other temples are temple centric. That's, you will have just one temple, which is like the most important, and the development of the city would be around it. But both Kumbakonam and Kanchipuram are unique because there are several temples under which there is a small settlement that has developed. So it looks more like a conglomeration of different settlements, different neighborhoods that makes up to the complete urban scape of the city. Coming back to Kanchipuram, the eastern Gopuram, which used to be there till the 16th century, was closed, brought down, and the Gopuram, the stones that were used, that were in place for that Gopuram, was shifted elsewhere. We'll see about that in a short while. So the eastern entrance per se, though the Murti is facing east, the eastern entrance per se does not take much of an importance. It's the southern entrance that all of us use. In fact, the designated entrance today is more the southern entrance, because that's where the parking lot and other things are. So the primary access is through the south. And before getting into the temple complex, there is a beautifully crafted 16-pillared mandapam, which is used to house the deity when he comes out in procession. This is a very typical Vijayanagara period mandapam, and we all know how Kanchipuram was ruled by almost all the popular dynasties that has ruled South India. That includes the Pallavas, starting from the Pallavas, and we have Sangam text which speaks about the Pallava kings ruling Kanchipuram. So it's for quite some time now, from the Sangam period, you had the Pallavas, then you had the Cholas, the imperial Cholas, followed by the Pandyas, and of course Kanchipuram was also, it did witness damages because of invasion of a milder level, thankfully, and then it continues into the Vijayanagara and the Nayak period, and finally into the colonial period also. You had local kings who were ruling with Kanchipuram for some time in between. And then during the colonial period, a little before the colonial period, it was also under the direct control of the Nawabs of Arcot and more. So that's probably when another huge mandapam right in front of Ekambareshwarar temple, say 100 meters from the temple, was converted into a mosque, and still it continues to be the same way. So these are all the different dynasties that have taken Kanchipuram under their control, political and control per se. So the 16-pillared mandapa there in front of the temple, and then it is followed by a 4-pillared mandapa. Let's just wait for a moment and take a look at these sculptures there. These are very typical 16th, 17th century sculptures. That's Chandrasekhara, Shiva as Chandrasekhara, and Parvati, Dakshinamurti, and that's Shiva and Parvati seated on the Kailasha Parvata Vahanam. So the Kailasha Parvata is shown on the rear side. You have two rishis who are praying to Shiva. On the rear side, you see those little pebble-like structures, pebble-like features that's supposed to represent the topography of Kailasha. On the forefront, you see Ravana, who's trying to lift the Kailasha Parvata by supporting it on his shoulders, managing to lift it up. So the very popular episode, this has been a common subject that has been referred to, the episode where Ravana's arrogance was brought down by Parameshwara to teach him a lesson. This is referred to in several occasions in Tevaram, and it becomes an important subject for the Sthapatis during the Chola period, and it continues into the Vijayanagara period also. It's so much so important in Shiva temples, this particular episode, that in almost all temples during the annual Brahmotsavam or the annual festival, one day is reserved for this Vahanam. So you have different vehicular mounts on which the deity is brought out in procession. So one day is reserved for the Kailasa Parvata Vahanam. This is a very interesting sculpture, a very unique sculpture too. That's a 5-headed deity with 10 arms. He holds a circular disc, which he is positioned to his right side. And there seems to be a small circular pedestal and an assistant just next to him, holding what looks like a rope. A very, very interesting and a unique story this is. This is supposed to represent Vishwakarma, the celestial architect. And the small disc with the face inscribed in it, that is supposed to be Surya, the sun god. And there is another pedestal, a circular plate kept on a pedestal and an assistant. The story goes like this. We all know that Surya's wife, Usha, and they had their own children. Yama was born to Surya and Usha. So when this was on, there was this occasion when Usha, Surya's wife, couldn't bear the heat that was emanating from the sun. So, when she couldn't do this, she wanted to move away from Surya Mandalam, and come out of the sphere, the sun's control sphere, want to come out of it. So she left her shadow there, which looks exactly like her, called as Chaya. She left her there without informing anybody. She took the form of a female horse and came down to Bhuloka, and she was here. Not knowing that it is the shadow of his wife, the sun god continued his life there with Chaya, which is the shadow of Usha. And when this was on, that is when their sons like Shaneshwara and all were born. Yama, the son of Usha, suddenly felt a difference in his mother's approach, because she is, after all, the shadow of his mother, and there seemed to be a difference. So Yama complained to Surya, and Surya investigated only to know the truth that his wife is down in the Bhulokam as a feminine horse. So he takes the form of a male horse, goes there and continues living with Usha. And that is when you have more children that are born. Ashwini Devatas were born during this occasion when Surya and Usha turned themselves into horses in Bhuloka. So when this news reached Usha's father, Twashta, he is the celestial architect. He is like the Mayans equivalent amongst the Devas. He is the architect for the Devas. So he manages to catch hold of the sun, and the architect that he is, he can reduce the dimensions and other things. So it's said that Surya's dimensions, which is the reason for the heat that he emanates, was reduced 1/8 from what it was by Twashta, the architect, by kind of using a plate on which he could cut short the brilliance of Surya, reduce it, to roll it around the plate and reduce it to 1/8 of what it used to be. He takes the help of his assistant, who is depicted there. So the Purana in Vishnu Purana, this episode in Vishnu Purana refers to the person who is doing this as Twashta, father of Usha. But here, of course, it's Vishwakarma who is depicted. He is also an architect, a step ahead of Twashta for that matter. So probably the architects, the traditional architects, wanted to replace the Purana with Vishwakarma, or there is their own version which says that it was Vishwakarma who managed to reduce the heat of Surya by reducing his dimension to 1/8 of what it used to be. A very, very unique story. Surya and Usha as horses, the sculpture is there in Badami, another very unique occasion. I'm not sure if there is this particular episode shown in other temples elsewhere in India, but this episode of which happened later of reducing Surya's heat by by managing to reduce his dimensions is what is being shown here in this bas-relief sculpture by Vishwakarma, the 5-headed, 10-armed sculptor. So, these column halls, the mandapas, the pillared mandapas, 16 pillared, 32 pillars, 64 pillars, etc., built during Vijayanagara Nayak period especially, are a treasure house of stories. And when you visit temples, especially with kids, take a moment to see if you can decipher a few and use this like the old period Amar Chitra Katha to tell them the stories. Yeah, this is in another pillar. This shows the story of Parvati invoking Shiva and worshipping him. And when the Ganga flows in as the river just next to the tree, so fast that Parvati was worried that the water flow would probably wash the Shivalingam away. She hugs it tight, so tight that the marks of her bosoms gets embedded on the Shivalingam because it was made out of earth. And till date, this lion is there on the Shivalingam. That's again dance of Shiva, and you see Brahma with 5 heads playing the Brahma Thalam, and on the other side of the column you have Parvati. Probably there would be Shiva as Urdhva Tandavam Murti on the other face of the column. So depicting Shiva performing the Urdhva Tandavam, Kali competing with him, Brahma and Vishnu playing different musical instruments is another common tradition that you see here. Brahma is of course 5-headed, probably depicts that this was before the occasion that one of his heads were plugged by Shiva. That's Varahi, and Parvati as Vishnu Durga, and that is Bhootha Vaganam, which is one of the Vahanas that happens. You can recall that the 16-pillared Mandapa was primarily built to house the deity during procession in different Vahanas. So that concept has probably inspired the sculptor to come up with how these Vahanas would probably look. You can actually see the wooden plank on which the deity will be ornamented and kept to look like as if the Bhootha Ganam is carrying him on its shoulders. That's Kachabheshwara, Mahavishnu as Kurma Avataram, who's worshipping Shiva. Now in Kanchipuram, of several different circuits of temples, one important is the temples, 10 temples dedicated to Shiva, each named after one of the avatars of Vishnu. So you have a Matsyeswarar, you have a Kachabheshwarar, you have a Varaheshwarar, a Nrsimheshwarar, Vamaneshwarar, and up to Karkishwarar. So each of this shrine is believed to have been built by the avatars, because all the 10 avatars that Vishnu took, after getting over with the role that he has to perform there, he worships Shiva, and there is a Shiva puja that he does, so that Shiva helps him conclude the avatara and get back to Vaikunta. So it is said that the first 5 avatarams were destroyed by Shiva, and the remaining 5 were blessed by Shiva. So you have the concept of Anugraha and Nigraha. Anugraha done for the second set of 5 avatars, and Nigraham or destruction being done to the first 5 avatars. So he helps Mahavishnu complete these avatars. So you have Matsya Samharamurti, Kurma Samharamurti, Varaha Samharamurti, and Sarabheshwara, who comes down to help Nrsimha come out of it. And of course, you have Shatanadar, who helped Vishnu complete the Vamana Avatara, and the story goes like that. So this is the depiction of Kachabheshwara. In fact, all these 10 temples are still there in Kanchipuram to visit. After the 16-pillared hall, we enter through the Gopuram, and this is by Krishnadevaraya, and the 6th tallest Gopuram in Tamil Nadu. A very grand Gopuram. If you enter Kanchipuram from the Bangalore highway, to your right, you will get to see this Gopuram, and it's very commanding and photogenic, in fact, even from far off. So as you walk in through this Gopuram, and there are other Gopurams on the other directions also, but this is what is primarily used. Yeah, so the one built by Krishnadevaraya. So as you enter, this is the first Prakaram. There are hardly few shrines in the outermost Prakaram. The 1000-pillared hall, or what is called as the 500-pillared hall, either ways, that is there, and very few shrines are there here. And Kamba Nadi, in fact, a small tank, which is supposed to be the water that collected after Ganges, Ganga managed to flow into Kanchipuram. The water kind of collected there, and the river is shrunk into a small tank today, and that is referred to as Kampa Nadi. This is the 1000 or 500 pillared hall. It takes both the names because it looks more like a G+1 structure with 500 columns in the lower tier and another 500 up. So it was majorly built during the Chola period, and you see inscriptions on these columns which refers to it as Vikrama Cholan Tirumaligai. So the 500 pillared hall, yeah, it has a small stage in the center where the deity is kept during special occasions. In fact, the most witnessed festival is the wedding ceremony of Ekambareshwarar and Kamakshi, which happens here in the month of Panguni, that's mid-March to mid-April. And you get into the next corridor, which has the Nandi Mandapam. A stucco image of Nandi painted is there. Just next to the Nandi shrine is Shivagangai, which is the celestial, tank for this, the sacred tank for this temple. It's quite surprising that all the 5 temples has one tank which is named as Shivagangai. The 5 tanks, the 5 temples, the Pancha Kshetra. This is the Rudrakoti Vimanam, the Vimanam on top of Ekambareshwarar's shrine. And inside Ekambareshwarar temple is another small shrine, which is referred to in the Thevaram lyrics as a separate shrine. In fact, this is called as Kachi Mayanam. Mayanam directly refers to the cremation grounds, and we know that there are schools of Shaivism which says that Shiva is a resident of the cremation ground also. So, this is a temple that has existed since Chola period. You see inscription from Rajaraja which speaks about this temple, existence of this temple and worship that was happening here. And the Vimanam has a very mild Pallava influence too. That's the shrine. You have a Shivalingam inside, and this is being referred to in the songs of upper as a Vaiputhalam. Vaiputhalam is those Shiva temples that does not have a dedicated set of 10 or 11 songs by the Thevaram authors, but you find reference of these shrines here and there. Maipadinda Kannalum, Tanum, Kachi Mayanathan, Varshadayan. So upper refers to Shiva's residence here in this place called Kachi Mayanam, which is inside Ekambareshwara temple today. And another structure that we conveniently miss is the one that is just next to the, that's on the western banks of Shivagangai tank. So after Kachi Mayanam, you walk in, you cross the Dvajastambam, and just to your right, immediately after you cross the Dvajastambam, there is a lonely shrine which continues to be there from the Pallava period. Now there is a typical design strategy that the Pallavas take when it comes to building Shiva temples. If it's a structural temple more often, or be it a cave temple also, either ways, whenever they build a shrine for Shiva, you have a Shivalingam which is enshrined in the center, in the geometric center of the small hall. And on the rear side, there is also always a panel depicting Shiva as Soma Skanda, accompanied by Parvati and Muruga as a little kid sitting on a throne. So that's a standard panel depiction that you see on the rear wall of any Shiva temple built by the Pallavas. But even when the Cholas, who later expanded and rebuilt these Pallava shrines, they made sure that the tradition continues. And there are few temples in northern parts of Tamil Nadu, which the Cholas have rebuilt, expanded, which has been there from the Pallava period, and that has required the Cholas to continue the tradition of having a Somaskanda panel on the rear wall. So this is one shrine. Though Ekambareshwara temple had seen extensive renovation during different periods, this structure, which is called as Rishabheswarar shrine today, has a Shivalingam right in the center, which is a Pallava period Shivalingam, which has multiple strips on it. Then on the rear wall, there is a figurine. Now, when I just told you that the rear wall is there to accommodate Somaskanda. But here in this shrine, there is a difference there, a very, very unique, and to the best of my knowledge, the only shrine which continues from the Pallava period, which has a Pallava period bas-relief panel, has Shiva and Parvati as Mahakala and Mahakali. You can see that Shiva with the Jadabhara, but he carries different weapons, and Ambal there also carries the trident, the Trishulam, and to her left lower arm, she has a Kapala Patram. In fact, I'll just point that out. That's the cup that she holds. The skull bowl is there, and this is the trident that she holds, the Trishulam. So a very, very unique feature. Probably the Mahakala and Mahakali are prominent deities to be worshipped by the Kapalika school of Shaivam. So Kanchipuram has had all these different schools of Shaivam managing to be together, and Ekambareshwara temple probably was a huge campus which housed shrines that were patronized by different schools of Shaivism, and this is continuous. We have literary evidences from Mahendravarma Pallava's Matavilasa Praharshanam, which speaks about Kapalika and Akapalani being a part of it, and their existence in Kanchipuram, and how the Kapalika very quietly as a part of the conversation in the Praharshana Grantha that he has authored, refers to the Purvasthali. So he has to go to that shrine on the eastern side. So it's time for him. So he has to run. There is a conversation that comes in between. So probably it is this shrine that he has referred to, which houses Shiva and Parvati as Kapalika, Mahakala and Mahakali. A shrine not to be missed. You just come out of this shrine, you see the Dvajastambam. And just next to the Dvajastambam is an image from the Chola period, which is identified as Karigala Chola. And unfortunately, there is also a name board which identifies him as Karigala Chola, and he's housed there. But it can be Kulothunga III. That's a Chola period royal portrait sculpture, wrongly identified as Karigala Chola. Then you enter into the next prakara, the next corridor hall, which was majorly renovated in the last century. So you see a lot of modern additions. So the complete corridor has been converted into a 19th, 20th century structure. And this corridor has several Shivalingams associated with different Puranas, each being enshrined by a different Devata for individual reasons and worship. So it's nice to go through Kanchi Puranam, which speaks about several of these lingams enshrined inside the Ekambareshwarar shrine. This is from a comparatively older period, from the Nayak period. These are bas-relief images on the columns, which depicts the story of Ekambareshwara, the Sthala Puranam, in fact, that's Shiva, in his penance, and that's Parvati trying to close his eyes. And finally, she comes down to Kanchipuram because of her curse and installs the Shivalingam and worships it. This is the shrine of Pralaya Bandhini, or that form of Kali who was invoked by Parvati to stand guard when Ganga river managed to come close. That's Pralaya Bandhini, the one who controlled the Pralayam. Then there are shrines, different shrines. This is for Shiva as Sahasralingam. So, there are different punyams that are prescribed by worshipping different numbers of Shivalingam. So to see a good 1,000 numbers of Shivalingam at one go is quite a challenging task. So they've managed to invoke 1,000 Shivalingams in one piece of stone and made it into an exclusive style of Shivalingam by itself. So just by worshipping this one lingam, it gets you the benefit of having worshipped 1,000 Shivalingams. And Ganesha as Heramba Ganapati, the five-faced Ganapati. And this is Ekambarenatha, probably a Nrupatunga Pallava period or Aparajitavarma Pallava period bronze that is still under worship. A very rare case where you have a bronze from the an Utsava Murti installed from the Pallava period that is still under worship. A very, very finely done workmanship that you get to see hardly in bronzes that were from more modern period. He is always housed inside a mirror hall, and quite uniquely, there is the tradition of blessing the devotees with what is called as Rudrapadam. You can see that here. That's the holy sandals of Shiva, and that is given to the devotees. That's Parvati as Yelavar Kurali. The Panchamurtis, so you have Ganesha starting from left, followed by Somaskanda from the Pallava period, and Parvati as Yelavar Kurali, Subramanya with Valli and Devasena, finally Chandikeshwara. This is the set of 5 gods that is generally brought out in procession. Nataraja from a much later period should be around the 17th century. That is the mango tree under which the Ekambareshwara Lingam was installed and worshipped by Parvati, and that's still there, and traditional records assign close to 5,000 years of age to this tree, and the mango fruit that ripens, it happens only for a very short period. It happens quite rarely, and it has just happened last week, and it was on news. It's such a rare occasion that it gets documented in news and all, and that's the image of Shiva and Parvati installed under the mango tree. That's Vishnu as Nila Tingal Tundattan. This is one of the 108 sanctified kshetrams, Vaishnavite kshetrams. And in Kanchipuram, quite uniquely, there is one Divyadesam inside Ekambareshwara temple and one inside Kamakshi Amman temple. the Nayanmars or the canonized devotees who are enshrined in the innermost corridor. And there's also an 18th century panels of paintings which depicts each of the Nayanmar on the wall up. That's the Sanctum Sanctorum. As you walk in, you can see the Ekambareshwarar lingam inside. On the rear side is Shiva and Parvati along with Muruga as Somaskanda. Since this Shivalingam is what has solidified from that raw earth that Parvati made, there is no direct Abhishekam performed, and not performing Abhishekam is a tradition that continues for several centuries from the imperial period, in fact. And so there is always a silver casing that covers the Mula Lingam, and there is also a very fine carving of Parvati depicted there as hugging the Shivalingam, as she did when Ganga came running near the Lingam. Inscriptions. This temple is referred to as Ekambarasya Dhama. The very word Ekambara has several meanings. So it's Ek Amra, which means that Shivalingam that's installed under the unique mango tree. So Ekamra Lingam, or if you want to call him as Ekambara with the Bha in there, Ekambara Lingam, which means that deity who wears just one piece of cloth. Ekambaram. Ambaram is the robe that you wear. So Ekambaram is one piece of cloth that he wears, which is Shiva, of course. But from Kulothunga III's period, it's referred to as Ekamrasya Dhamaha. So identifying this as the Shivalingam that is installed under that one unique mango tree is from 13th century. And there was a stone pillar, in fact, with a small part of the stone pillar with had the titles of Mahendra Varma Pallava inscribed on it. Because if it was unique, the only piece of stone that was within Pallava period inscriptions in it, it was taken from the temple because it was lying around there without much of security, and it is kept in the Chennai Museum. And from the Chola period, Kanchipuram has been an important center because that's where northern parts of Tamil Nadu kind of begins, the political boundary. So for security reasons, from Sundara Chola's period or even a little before that, they have always managed to expand in the northern directions, and Kanchipuram is like in the prime spot. So building a palace for themselves there and staying there has been an important aspect. So you had the elder brother of Rajaraja the Great, Aditya Karikala, who built a palace there and got its roof gold gilded, and his father, Sundara Chola, is believed to have stayed there. So identifying it as the Ponmaligai is there in the inscriptions. The 1,000-pillared hall that you see is referred to as both Kulothunga Cholan Tirumaligai and Vikrama Cholan Tirumaligai. The pillars have these inscriptions. The inscription on the southern Gopuram through which we entered has references to donations made by Krishnadevaraya. And it says there is another inscription from Kulothunga's period which speaks about a Sahasra Kalasa Abhishekam, or Abhishekam performed with 1,000 parts, which is generally followed by offering of food in huge quantity on the Uttarayanam day to the deity of Tirukachi Mayanam, that small shrine that we saw in the beginning. A later period inscription speaks about an exclusive shrine for Ganapati being built, an individual called as Ganapati Devan, instituting a special puja to be performed every day in his name, and he gives a few villages, revenue from which goes on to conduct the festival and also pay people like the priest, the people who are employed in the temple. That includes the priest, cooks, helpers, gardeners, and all of them. And there are fragmentary inscriptions from the 16th century which speaks about of donations made during the eclipse phase, when the eclipse is actually happening. Performing dharmakaryas is believed to earn you a lot of good deeds. So, Grahana Punya Kalam, as it is called, and donations made during that period. Southern, the Rajagopuram, in fact, the eastern Rajagopuram that is missing today was built, and it has existed for some time. And that the Gopuram was brought down, and the blocks of stones were numbered, and it was removed from the structure, shifted over to Vaikunta Perumal Kovil, which is very close by, and one of the Divyadesams, in fact. And the front Gopuram structure, the base stone structure, which is there in Vaikunta Perumal temple today, is the Gopuram structure that stood in the eastern direction of Ekambareshwarar temple. You can still see it in Vaikunta Perumal temple with all the numbering done on it, the numbers etched on it. There is one from the second regnal year of Kulothunga, which speaks about donating cows to burn perpetual lamps. But what is interesting here is the name of the measure to measure ghee, the jar in which the ghee was measured, is referred to as Taluva Kulaindan. Now, that is the name of Shiva himself. That's another interesting aspect. In several hundred inscriptions, you see names of endowments created or special gifts given will all be in the names that uniquely identifies the deity there in the temple. You have the Telugu Cholas who came like Vijay Kantakopala and all, and there are inscriptions from their period also. There is a shrine of Ganesha that was built along with a Vijayastambam or a pillar of victory to celebrate victory by a person called Kanakambar, who's the daughter of Kakatiya Ganapati. Kanakamba, the daughter of Kakatiya king Ganapati. And two other important inscription is, one is from Achyutadevaraya's time, when there is a reference to a scholar called as Srinivasa, who translated the stories of Nayanmars into Tamil and authored a book called as Shiva Bhakti Vilasam. So he has translated the stories into Sanskrit and called it as a work. The work is called as Shiva Bhakti Vilasam. This Srinivasa is identified as the great scholar Srinivasa Dikshitar, or the scholar who is more popularly remembered as Ratnaketa Dikshitar, who is the celebrated father-in-law of Sri Appaya Dikshitendra. So, but there is a debate in this. Several scholars agree that this Srinivasa should have been Srinivasa Dikshitar or Ratnaketa Dikshitar, father-in-law of Appaya Dikshitendra. And the most important is from the 18th century. It's an English inscription, in fact, from a British collector of Kanchipuram called as Hudson. This English official who rebuilt the exterior compound wall as we see it today. The wall that you see today was renovated, repaired, and rebuilt during his time. Unfortunately, he managed to collect stone blocks from temples that have fallen down, or temples or stones from random places, managed to finish the compound wall. And he has also inscribed that as a piece of information in an inscription. Unfortunately, he's brought blocks which had images of Buddha, or some identify that as Jaina, but we're not getting into it. But majorly it's Buddha, with images of Buddha like you see in this picture, to repair this compound wall. Days when people really didn't think that this might create a controversy later, but thanks to Hudson, his goodwill of repairing the compound wall of Shiva temple had led into a lot of unnecessary controversial theories being put forward that this used to be a Buddhist shrine which was brought down and then it was converted into a Shiva temple. In a huge campus which covers several acres of land, representations of a handful of images which is of Buddha, and a theory floating that this used to be a very happening Buddhist shrine that was converted later is something that even a little kid would refute. It's unfortunate that you need to identify everything with Buddhism or Jainism or claim that everything started from there if you want to be identified as a scholar here. And so the tradition continues, but people very conveniently, people who locate this particular Buddha and write and speak a lot about it, conveniently miss the fact that it was Hudson, and he very well says that this renovation was done, and he is brought in fact, there are several fragmentary inscriptions also which do not belong to Ekambareshwarar temple, which is a part of this compound wall fabric today. So, the fact is very clear. There is absolutely no scope to claim this to be an erstwhile Buddhist temple, but these are blocks from temples that is lot patronized and probably was falling down, or random stones available there. Of course, Buddhism was flourishing as a very popular school in Kanchi, but that was several hundreds of years before Hudson even came in here. Which is, almost all popular saints have sung about Ekambareshwara. You have the people, the Shaivite saints, the four important Shaivite saints, all four of them have sung about Ekambareshwara. You have Arunagirinathar, who had sung on Subramanya Shrine here. Most importantly, Kachiyappa Sivacharya, who has authored Kanda Purana. That part of Skandam, Skanda Puranam, which speaks about Subramanya's avataram and majorly all the Shiva Leelais and all that, has been translated into Tamil. He was from Kanchipuram too. And you have Irattai Pulavargal from Tamil Nadu, twin poets in fact, and Muthuswami Dikshitar, who is sung the immortal Bhairavi Raga Kriti, has stayed in Kanchipuram for quite some time. So he has visited and he has sung about this god. Kalamega Kavi, Pattinattar, there's only a few. Several episodes from the life history of different Shaiva saints are associated with Kanchipuram. You have the story of Sundaramurti Nayanar, who lost his eyesight in Tiruvattriyur, and he was blinded. In fact, he lost his vision in both his eyes. He managed to walk to Kanchipuram with a stick that Shiva gifted him when he came to Thiruvenpakam, and comes to Kanchipuram, prays to Shiva there, and he says, Kalakalane Kambanemmane Kana Kan Adiyen Petravare. He was blessed with vision in his left eyes. So that's what Sundara tells us. And festivals, yes, you have the grand Panguni festival, which starts in which is celebrated in the month of Panguni with hoisting the flag on the Dvajastambam. That's the Dvajastambam with the Rishabha Dvajam there. And then there are it's a 10-day festival which has post-festival occasions also. So that's the Adhikara Nandi Vahanam or Nandikeshwara carrying Shiva and Parvati. That's Surya Prabhai or Surya becoming a Vahanam with all the 7 horses and his own charioteer and all that. And the same day, in the night time, you have, in the evening, you have a procession in Chanda Prabhai or the moon god as such, the orb of the moon. And this is the Bhootha Vaganam. And that's the silver chariot that's brought out. You can see both Ekambareshwarar and Elavar Kudali house there. That's the Maharatham, Nandi Vahanam. And you can recall the bas-relief sculpture that we saw in the 16-pillared hall, which has the Ravana, the Kailasa Giriva Parvatam, Kailasa Parvata Vahanam, which is shown with Ravana. And to recall the episode which involves how Shiva brought down the arrogance of Ravana. That's the procession of the 63 Nayanmars, which also happens annually. That's the Velli Ther again, or the silver chariot. This is a very special festival of the 10-day festival. That occasion when the worship that Parvati did is recalled. So you have the Amra Vriksham or the mango tree which becomes the Vahanam, and you have the deity that comes out in procession. That's Shiva in the Nandi Vahanam. The celestial wedding that happens is a grand ceremony, in fact. So that's Ekambareshwarar and Elavar Kudali or Kamakshi. It's a very grand event, in fact, and because it happens in the beginning phase of summer season, you have a lot of flowers, and all that is put to best use with such beautiful garlands and the jewelry. You have several jewelry that continues from the Nayak period. I mean, donations made from the Nayak period still there with precious stones and pearls and all that. That's the little parrot that Kamakshi Amman holds in her hand. Headgears, different styles of headgears. The rear side, shoulder and arms of Ekambareshwarar with the Bahu Valayam. Necklace, pearl, and coral beads. And she's also wearing the Rudraksha beads there. That's the Rudraksha Malai that Kamakshi is wearing. And the stone-studded Jadai that ornaments her plate. Yeah, so the wedding celebration is the most important one. So Parvati or Ekambareshwara Valli or Elavar Kudali goes to a Durga temple in the outskirts of Kanchipuram, a short distance from Ekambareshwara temple, and she is accompanied by several other goddesses from different temples. And it's like, walking along with your friend into the city of Kanchipuram. So she's just coming from Kasi. She's entered Kanchipuram, and the priests take up her role, and so they collect earth, soil from the temple campus and make a Shivalingam out of it and perform a proper Shiva Puja. So all that is done by the representative priests. And for a moment when Shiva gives her a darshan, the lights are switched off and there is a screen that is drawn. So it's a personal moment of getting the darshan of Shiva for Kamakshi alone. And then the wedding process kind of starts. So Shiva as Sundareswara or as that handsome groom walks into the hall, and the wedding hall is all set ready. This happens on the terrace of the 500-pillared hall. So that's the wedding hall, that's the pandal. You can see the decorated mandapam. So Shiva climbs the steps to climb up to the terrace of the 500-pillared hall. And both Shiva and Kamakshi take their seats there, and the priest conduct the wedding. It is conducted in a very, very Vedic fashion. So all traditions and all the parts that goes into a Vedic wedding or a traditional wedding is all conducted, all rituals are conducted there also. And finally, the Mangala Sutram is tied around by the priest as representative of Shiva. And it is almost early in the morning when the Vivaham kind of gets over. It's witnessed by several hundreds of people thronging and stay there through the night. So, starting from Parvati's entry into Kanchipuram and making the Shivalingam, worshipping it, and all the Kampa Nadi coming in, and finally Shiva blessing her and the wedding. So it's an all-night process. It's a full night process. And other rituals post-wedding, an annual festival. There are other rituals that goes into the concluding days. So there is this grand palanquin made out of flowers, decorated completely with flowers, and it's nice to see that different community people, endowments that are still existing to celebrate the festival every day. So each of the festival is done by one community from Kanchipuram. It's nice to see all families belonging to the community and all the members of the community coming together to celebrate the festival. This is the float festival, which is also a part of the Brahmotsavam. So that's Ekambareshwarar Kshetram to you. So earth that was made into a Shivalingam by Kamakshi and worshipped has, the tradition has continued, expanded to the venue that it used to be a very humble venue probably when first Parvati came in with just that mango tree and maybe a couple of more trees around. And she stayed there to make the Shivalingam and worship. And this tradition from the Puranic episode has continued into the structure being expanded by different dynasties, patronized by different dynasties, more importantly being visited by several of these saint poets who have sung in praise of it and documented it. And so the kings have also concentrated on temples that were sanctified by the visits of these saints, and the tradition has continued to several thousand years today, and it is there for us to still witness, and the festival still being celebrated as started by the kings, and the songs composed on this temple by the saints still being sung in the temple, and a tradition that has gotten so strong and continuing. Of course, this is a common feature that you see in several thousands of temples around the Bharat Desha, but we have to keep talking about this every time. Whichever temple we are going to talk about, we'll have to keep re-emphasizing on the fact that this is a tradition that has been there for several thousands of years together. At least documented, it has been there for more than 1,000 years. God knows since when it has been in existence, and it has continued to be the same way. So that's for Ekambareshwarar temple. Next week, we will take a tour to Thiruvanekka temple, which is the Appulinga Kshetram, where God is manifested as water, as the second element. And there are very unique traditions and a very beautiful temple with Jambukeshwara and Akhilandeshwari, the presiding deity, Shiva and Parvati, and the tradition of how the priest of the temple dress up in a sari, as you can see in the picture. Every day, the noon puja is performed like this, where the priest wears a silk sari and comes to the shrine of Jambukeshwara to do the ko-puja and go in and perform the noon rituals to Shivalingam there. And more importantly, the architecture, which is very classic Chola architecture, and inscriptions that are equally surprising and very interesting, in fact. So that will be there as a subject for next Sunday evening. We'll post the timings by around Wednesday next. You can check out on my Twitter handle or my Facebook page for the timings. It will be there next Sunday evening. And thanks for joining us. And with that, I finish the first lecture of this series. I'll quickly take the questions. So, Nila Tingal Tundam got enshrined inside Ekambareshwarar temple. Was the Vishnu temple separate earlier and after Mughal invasion? No. This temple, see, according to Agamic prescriptions, there can be a Vishnu shrine inside Shiva temple. There is absolutely nothing that stops it. In fact, it is to be there. Probably, Ekambareshwarar temple, as we see today, was not what it was when Thirumangai Alvar came to Kanchipuram. These were temples that were in close proximity, probably without a compound wall, but a part of the same temple. And Alvar sang this particular shrine. And later on, as the temple expanded, all the shrines have gotten together and built together. But there is a Puranic episode also, which links these two temples and the presence of Perumal there, the Nila Tingal Tundal, Perumal there. But associating this with Islamic invasion is quite not possible. Are there two versions of Panchabhuta Sthalams? Where in the second version, yes, endless Moolanatha from Thiruvarur Tyagaraja Swami temple. Yes, There are in fact more lists of Panchabhuta Sthalams coming in today. When you see a group of 5 temples associated with the elements, or in the Sthala Puranam and all that, I'm surprised to know that there is in fact a circuit of Panchabhuta Sthalams to Chennai exclusively. That being said, the tradition has included Prithvi Lingam, Vanmikanatha Lingam of Thiruvarur to be the Prithvi Lingam also. Till date, a few continue it. But I'm told that when this question was put to Kanchi Mahaswami, he asked the person who questioned him to recall all the kritis of Muthuswami Dikshita and said that he has very explicitly referred to Ekambareshwarar Lingam as Prithvi Lingam. So that's what Kanchi Mahaswami has given as a reply to this question. So I would like to respect that and continue the tradition. There are a few scholars who include Valmika Lingam of Thiruvarur also. There are a few who replace Valmika Lingam also, but it is up to you. Predominantly, this is the list which has Ekambareshwarar Lingam of Kanchi. Mahakala and Mahakali situated in which place exactly in the temple? Could you help to know? Yeah. You cross the Dvajastambam, and when you move towards the Garbhagraham, there'll be a small right, an insignificant right, in fact, which is abutting the tank, the temple tank. In fact, that right will walk you to the Annadana Kudam. And in the end of the Annadana Kudam is this little shrine. Yeah, that's the best way to identify it. Go to the Annadana Kudam, and at the end of the Annadanam place is where this shrine is. But the shrine is opened only during puja, but you can strain yourself by, you'll have to focus really well to see the Mahakala Mahakali image on the rear wall. During 17th century Aurangzeb's invasion, it seemed that Varadaraja Swami was moved to Udayarpalayam for escaping the wrath. Any reference on how Kamakshi and Ekam? That was more during the Arcot, when the colonial period, when the Nawab of Arcot and the colonial rule from Chennai was fighting, and Arcot and Kanchipuram, outskirts of Kanchipuram, turned out to be a scene of chaos. So yes, including, along with Varadaraja Swami, Ekambareshwara Utsavamurti and that of Kamakshi were all taken. In fact, Bangaru Kamakshi, that image of Kamakshi made out of gold, was also taken to Udayarpalayam, and all 3 Murtis have stayed there in the Udayarpalayam Jameen. And it is said that while all these 3 Murtis came back, Bangaru Kamakshi had to be protected, and so she went to Thiruvarur, and from there she went to Tanjavur, and that's where she is housed still. So when you go to Tanjavur, you can see the shrine of Bangaru Kamakshi. And that is exactly why the shrine of Bangaru Kamakshi in Kanchi Kamakshi Amman temple is still vacant. What is the sequence to visit these 3 temples? By 3, I think you're referring to Ekambareshwara, Kamakshi, and Varadaraja Swami. There is no particular sequence per se. So, depends on the school that you follow. And to people who are into Shrividhe, Kamakshi is the most important. In fact, there are tantric texts on Kanchipuram and worship of Kamakshi, which makes Ekambareshwara and Varadaraja as 2 sub-shrines of the massive shrine of Kamakshi. In fact, the whole city of Kanchipuram is considered as a shrine of which Kamakshi is in the sanctum sanctorum, and Ekambareshwara and Varadaraja Swami are like sub-shrines within the main temple. So it's up to you to choose and visit. Tree, Kali, Amba, and Ekambareshwara Lingam are in different spots. As per story, they should be very next to each other. I submit my ignorance. Okay. See, these traditional stories and other things, they haven't followed the same landscape. There have been occasions where probably it was rebuilt during expansions and all that. So I respect your question. There is nothing to feel ignorant about it. But yeah, so the story kind of still continues. And with time, when expansion happens, now let's consider a temple even in today's context, which is there under a tree, literally under a tree, with a small platform on which the deity is kept. Some years later, maybe there might be the local people, village people, who want to make it into a temple with a small shrine with a roof on top and a vimanam. So the murti that was enshrined touching the roots of the tree would be moved from there to accommodate a small shrine. So such things are quite possible, and probably that is how they have moved. Did Vishnu play a role in Parvati's tapas under the mango tree? Yes. So he was in fact standing there standing witness to see what was happening. And it is said that he was trying to overhear the commands that Parvati was giving to Mahalakshmi. And hence Parvati saw this and addressed him as Kalvan. So the Divyadesam inside Kamakshi's temple is Kalvanur, and the Perumal is called as Kalvan, or the thief that he was. There is a theory that the temple derives its name from a kambam. Yeah, kambam meaning a mass. That's also there. So the tradition of worshipping huge monolithic stones That's a common tradition called as menhirs, which is an archaeological feature that you see in many many culture, which represents a Shivalingam, is also associated as one of the theories for worshipping Shiva as the Shivalingam. So that's a common concept across the world. So that's in fact put forward as a theory to know that how Shaivite tradition is common amongst several civilizations across the world. Here, yes, the Nayanmars have addressed him as Ek Kamban, Vellai Kamban, Kallak Kamban. So there are different Shivalingams referred to by the name Kamban. And excavations that have happened in Kanchipuram has revealed a lot of potsherds, black and red potsherds and all that. So the space has been under habitation from prehistoric times also. And the tradition of worshipping the pillar that is erected in the northeastern corner of a Yagashalai called as the Yupastambam. The construction of the Yagashalai will always start from erecting a column in the northeastern side, and that pillar is continued even after the yagam is over. Worshipping the pillar kind of continues. So there are a few theorists who consider Ekambareshwarar as a representation of one such kambam, which means a pole that was erected and worshipped, and it is continued. So these are other theories too. In your opinion, which is more acceptable? To me personally, the concept of Kambar seems to be historically appropriate, but we will have to definitely respect the Quranic accounts also. So I reserve my own comments here. So I don't mean, like, I give you the choice to pick from. Sir, name of the temple, which name of the temple is derived from Eka Kambam. Yeah, as I told you, Ek Kamban, Vattrai Kamban, or that one and only pillar that's also there, which is the oldest temple in Kanchipuram when it was built. A very, very tough question to answer. In fact, not just Kanchipuram, any temple, the exact date of origin of the temple is extremely tough. But if you just want to consider the architectural features and then assign a date to it, you have the temples of Mukteshwara and Matangeshwara, all that from the, and Piravasthanam and Iravasthanam, which is which are the twin temples that when you enter Kanchipuram from Bangalore highway, immediately after crossing the railway gate, a kilometer from the railway gate crossing, to your left and right, you will see a temple. The one to your left is probably one of those from the earliest phase, which is still in existence. Prasadam. Yeah, we'll try to accommodate that from next time, but of course, digitally. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that completes it. Yeah, this is from the YouTube, and yeah, Mystical Palmyra series will continue from Monday to Saturday. These presentations on Sunday evenings are what I do for my YouTube channel. And does any literature speak in detail about the city architecture of Kanchi, like we have Madurai Kanchi for Madurai and Silapadigaram for Pumbuhar? Perumbanatrupadai doesn't help much. Perumbanatrupadai is more a book that documents the travel to the city of Kanchipuram. The last phases of Kanchi definitely helps you get a picturesque depiction of how the city of Kanchipuram looks. So, but for that, if you want to go for ancient texts, I think we will have to depend on probably Kanchi Puranam, which speaks about the city and its greatness. And there is a very detailed account on Kanchi in the works of Shekidar in Peripuranam, when he speaks about Tirukkurippu Tondar, who was born in Kanchipuram. So he, being from Tondai Mandalam, just uses the chance to sing elaborately the praise of Kanchipuram. So probably that might help you too. Kachalishwara temple in Armenian Street, built by Kalavai Chetty, an inscription in the wall. He came to give darshan, yes, as the devotee could not go to Kanchi due to rains, yes. But this is the one in Georgetown, the Kalavai Chetty Street, built by Kalavai Chettiar, and as the inscription goes, that is in Armenian Street in Georgetown. This is the representation of Kachabeshwarar temple and not Ekambareshwarar. Kachabeshwarar is also an old temple which is there in Kanchipuram. In fact, that is from the Chola period. You have inscriptions, you have fragmentary sculptures starting from the Pallava period. Is Devi Kamakshi and Devi Kamakya Devi same or different? Of course, they are two different Shakti Peetams, and their traditions and stories and all that differs. While this is the Udyana Peetam, that Peetam has its own special name and reverences. So yeah, I think that's up with the questions. Thank you for being around. And so next Sunday evening again, we'll post the time by around Wednesday. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Shri Tyagaraja Maharajo Vijayate. Ellam Shri Tyagaraja Kripai.